Hi there, my name's Ian Candy and I'm a Professor of Geography here at Royal Holloway, University of London. I'm also the admissions tutor, so I'm your point of contact if you're thinking about applying here. I did my degree here at Royal Holloway in the 1990s. I'm passionate about geography in general, but I'm also passionate about geography here at Royal Holloway. And I'm going to be leading you through this session on geography in a changing world with my co-admissions tutor, Dr. Alistair Pinkerton. Alistair, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you very much. So I'm Alistair Pinkerton. I'm also responsible in part for the undergraduate recruitment process. And it's great that so many of you are joining today. What I should say is that you can ask questions or make comments down the sidebar of this video on Facebook. So if you want to ask anything in response to what we're saying, stick a comment in there and we'll answer it straight away.
Great, thanks very much, Al. So one of the things on a normal open day you get to meet students, you get to meet a lot more members of staff, and you get a real feel for what the geography department at Royal Holloway is like. We're doing this online, and we're going to talk about geography in a changing world, but we're going to start off by talking a little bit about the department and how our department works. And I would say if you came here, and people who come here on our open days, the one thing they take away is that the department here is a real community. As soon as you arrive, there's a friendly atmosphere. We know this, our students, the students know us, there's real interaction. We understand our students and we help them throughout their 3 years of studies. And we have excellence both in terms of the way we teach, we also have excellence in terms of our research, and we're going to be talking about the way that some of the staff here at Royal Holloway, their research influences the world around us. But the key point is that we link back teaching and research. You're being taught by world leaders, people who are actively developing the subject, not just people who have read about the subject in textbooks. So what's going to happen today, geography in a changing world? We're just going to start off very briefly by talking about what's special about our department. We're then going to think about the degrees you might take if you decided to study with us, and then we're going to talk about this idea of geography in a changing world. How is the world changing? And we're going to give you a number of examples of the way in which the world is changing and the way in which geographers in our department are trying to investigate and understand that change.
Well, we're going to start off by talking about two of the really key things that make up any academic department in any university in the UK. And that is the quality of the research that we undertake, and here, the quality of the teaching that we deliver. Now, clearly the teaching is going to be really important to you as undergraduates starting either in September this year, 2020, or next year, 2021. The great thing about our department is that we are extremely good at teaching. We've been rated amongst the top departments for the past 10 years or more. And so here are some of the external measures that measure the quality of our teaching. And we can turn to the Guardian League Table, for example, that places us first in the UK for satisfaction with our teaching, third in the UK for overall course satisfaction. And then turning to the National Student Survey, you can see there at the bottom of this slide, 96% overall satisfaction from our students. So the truth is that all of these figures are generated from the National Student Survey. And that is a survey that's conducted with every student in every department in the country. They're invited to reflect on the 3 years of undergraduate teaching that they've had up to that point. And they can talk about the quality of the teaching spaces, the quality of the teaching, the level of support that they've had, the quality of feedback and assessment that they have enjoyed during their 3 years of study. So this is the very best way. This is the nationally agreed standard for measuring satisfaction with teaching. And as I say, we're number one this year, and we are frequently in the very highest 90% for satisfaction from our students. Now, the other big thing that departments in universities do is, of course, to undertake research. And research is incredibly important to the lifeblood of the university and to the work that academics do. And again, the great thing is that in the most recent independent exercise of assessing research, which is called the REF, the last one was undertaken in 2014, the next one will be 2021, we were placed as the #2 department in the entire country for the quality of our research. And that's really important for teaching, because the work that we are doing, the research that we are undertaking around the world is feeding back into our first year teaching, second year and third year undergraduate provision. You're going to be taught by some of the world's leading experts on geopolitics, social geography, climate change, development studies. So the people who are teaching you are the people who have written the textbooks, the people who have written the papers that you will be reading, and you'll be hearing directly from them. And what we're going to do slightly later in this presentation is showcase 3 different areas of research that have had real policy relevance over the past year or so. Now, of course, when you bring research and teaching together, you want to be in the top right-hand position on this graph, because so often really good teaching departments aren't necessarily great research departments, and great research departments aren't necessarily great teaching departments. The wonderful thing about our geography department is that we're right up there in the top right-hand corner, combining incredible internationally leading research with nation-leading teaching. So there we are, and that is indeed a rare combination, occupying that top right-hand corner of this graph.
Great. Now, what I'd like to do is just talk very briefly about our degrees. Now, you can see here the list of degrees that we offer in the department: BSc Geography, BA Geography, BSc Physical Geography, BA Human Geography. And for 2021 entry, we have these new degrees: BA in Environment and Social Change and BSc in Environment and Social Change. The other thing to remember, and I'm sure you'll hear more of this on the open day, is that you can take any of these degrees as a 3-year degree or as a 4-year degree with a placement year, normally between your second and third year of studies. And there's a number of different ways that you could have that placement degree: placement with a job company, so placement in industry, placement with some kind of volunteering organisation or charity, or study abroad. And that's something that we encourage our students to take, and something that you'll have talks on elsewhere during the day. Just very briefly, the Environment and Social Change degree, this is a new degree. And really, it's because over the last few years, we've become aware that we've known this as geographers for a while, the importance of climate change, but there's a strong demand for urgent change in terms of the way that society behaves in response to climate change. And Royal Holloway is relatively uniquely placed in that we have people in both geography and earth sciences who study the science behind climate change, an understanding of the processes, how we know it's happening. We have people in biological sciences and earth sciences and geography who understand the impact on earth systems of those changes. We have people in the geography department and psychology who think about the impact on society and the impact on the psychology of societies and communities and individuals. So really the idea of this degree is to give you the opportunity to engage with the way in which climate change impacts the environment, people, the individual, and actually have an interdisciplinary degree which spans across all of the different departments and all of the different skills that we have to offer here at Royal Holloway. And I would say that if you want more information on this, email Katie Willis, who's basically in charge of undergraduate studies here in geography, katie.willis@rhul.ac.uk, and she'll be able to give you more information about that degree. And the final thing, of course, whatever degree you do, fieldwork is a key important part of a geography degree. Okay, and the first year field trip to Spain is one of the key ways in which we get students engaging with the study of geography in the real world. Geography is a subject which obviously there are theories, there are ideas and concepts that we study in lecture theatres, but also geography is a subject that you need to go out into the real world and study. And throughout all 3 years of our geography degrees, from the first year field trip to Spain to a range of opportunities in the second year: Sicily, Cyprus, New York, Malawi, and then bespoke field trips associated with third year options, you get an opportunity to go and engage with the real world. And the first year field trip to Spain is part of your fee, so there's no extra cost to that first year field trip once you've arrived. So what we're now going to do in the last kind of 20 minutes that we have with you
is to give a showcase of some of the research that gets done in this department. So as I said, we have some world-leading experts in this department in social and cultural geography, in political geography, in development geography, and in quaternary geoscience, scientists who look at at climate change and the last 2.5 million years. And what we want to do today is to show you some showcases of the research that gets done and how that research is changing the way that our government works and society thinks about some of the main issues facing us in this very rapidly changing world that we currently find ourselves living in. So the first person that I want to talk about is Dr. Ollie Mould. So Ollie will be, if you come and join us, could be your first year tutor. He will certainly be teaching you in cultural geographies in second year, and he has a very popular third year course. And Ollie is an expert in changing cities, the changing nature of urban places and spaces in a highly globalized environment. He does lots of work in London and other global cities. He also leads the second year field trip to New York. So here you have a world expert who will be teaching you at some point during your degree. One of Ollie's great interests is the nature of the so-called creative economy. We hear a lot about creativity in relation to urban planning and urban policy. And our attention might be drawn to sites like here, the Silicon Roundabout in East London, sites where creative communities, hipsters, and others are developing apps, AI technology, virtual reality, and there are clustering in particular parts of our cities, fundamentally changing the nature of the communities who have traditionally lived in these parts of our cities. And the transformation that these people, because of their arrival, is having. So one of the things that Ollie works on is actually some surprising elements of creativity. So here we have some examples of what Ollie thinks of as particular kinds of creative spaces. These, so we've got Christiana in Copenhagen, we've got the Grow Heathrow site near Heathrow Airport, which isn't terribly far from us. Can Mazdu in Barcelona and Kuli in Berlin, all of these places are sites of creativity, but for communities who are so often excluded from the urban experience. So homeless communities, marginalized communities, refugee communities, and asylum communities, given spaces to come together, to take part in creative thinking that so often denied them as part of the globalization of our major cities. And if you look at the aesthetic of these pictures, the use of graffiti, the use of kind of hastily put together constructions, the reuse of materials, urban gardens. It's really interesting when you take this set of images and then apply that to scenes like this, which is actually an event that was sponsored in 2019 by Smirnoff Vodka in central London, recreating some of the aesthetic of those hastily put together sites that we see around Europe, and reproducing that aesthetic for their corporate clients. This was a pick your own festival that Smirnoff arranged in central London. But what's interesting isn't just the aesthetic, it's the place that they've done this in. So this is a site at the very center of London's booming globalized economy. And what you have here is a bit of land that hasn't yet been regenerated. It hasn't yet found that tipping point of economic value, after which it's used for building. So we can see a lot of these spaces in and around our global cities. These are very typical during times of recession when land value drops. And we're likely to see more of these kind of spaces in our urban experience over, frankly, the next few years. And one of the ways that these spaces are often used by the forces of globalization, by local authorities and large corporations, is to give people a feeling of kind of investment in their urban spaces. Perhaps with questions asking, what would you like to see done in this particular space? kind of expensive, glossy speculations about, what will these spaces be used for in the future. And I think we're all increasingly used to seeing spaces like pop-up shops, for example, occupying previously occupied retail premises, creating new kinds of retail spaces or hospitality opportunities for startup companies. And again, these are the kind of things we're likely to see far more of in the years to come. Ollie has just published an incredibly well-reviewed book that will be part of his course. It's called Against Creativity, and he's a wonderful speaker. So I recommend looking him up on the internet. He does lots of talks at big festivals and at other meetings. And you can hear one of those talks there on YouTube that he gave in Brussels at the Full Circle event last year.
Great, thanks very much, Al. So that's an example of some of the work that one of our human geographers does in understanding a changing world. And now I'm going to talk about an example from physical geography. So Alistair's already mentioned that Royal Holloway geography has an international reputation in quaternary science. Well, what is quaternary science? The quaternary is the last 2.5 million years, and it's the period of time where the ice ages occurred. It's a period of time of very rapid natural climate change. And one of the reasons that we're so interested in this period is it allows us to understand how climates change naturally and the impact of those changes on the Earth system, on ecosystems, on surface processes. And that allows us to think about what might happen in the future. But also, by understanding why climates change naturally, we also understand why what's happening now is different. One of the big debates of global warming is, if you know that climate change has occurred in the past, how do you know what's happening now is something different? How do you know it's not just part of a natural cycle? And by studying climate in the past, that's what we can do. We can understand natural variability and understand why what's happening now is different. Now, the academic I'm going to talk about here, Dr. Bethan Davis. Bethan is a senior lecturer in the department here, and she's a glaciologist. So Bethan studies the way in which glaciers respond to climate change. And Bethan's research is really vast, it's really diverse. Bethan has worked on ice ages in the past when you've had ice sheets covering large parts of, say, Britain or large parts of South America, and understanding how those ice sheets have gradually melted and retreated. She's been working on more recent climate change impacts on glaciers, and she's also worked on modelling the future, modelling how glaciers will respond in the future. Bethan is also heavily involved with outreach and the communication of science, and I would recommend the antarcticglaciers.org website is a website that Bethan has put together to communicate the science of glaciers and ice sheets and their response to climate change to a wider audience. Now, one of the things that we think about, when we think about glaciers responding to climate change, what's the impact? Well, lots of people think about sea level change because, of course, as ice sheet melts, the melting water goes into the ocean basin and causes sea level to rise. And certainly, if we think about somewhere like Britain, and you think about what Britain might be like 100 years into time, an island nation, at the moment we already have coastal erosion issues, lots of low-lying areas. Sea level change is undoubtedly going to be a major impact of glacier response to climate change. So understanding the way in which glaciers will respond over the next 100 years is important. But another major impact of changing glaciers, which a lot of people haven't really considered in as much detail, or perhaps isn't as communicated as much in the general public, is actually freshwater supply. Because if you have a glacier sat in a mountain and that glacier releases meltwater every year, the population living downstream of that have a reliable, regular source of freshwater that you can use for drinking or that you can use for irrigation. But of course, as glaciers melt, and actually as glaciers start to disappear, that source of fresh water will also disappear, and the population can no longer rely on getting regular access to fresh water. All this slide is showing, so on the left, that diagram there, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC 2014, basically just showing that if you have a mountain range with glaciers sat on top of them, then those glaciers are in equilibrium with their climate. They're in equilibrium with the temperature and the amount of snowfall. If you change climate, and if the climate of that region warms, effectively you warm the temperature of the high mountain, you change the equilibrium, and the glaciers shrink, in response to that new equilibrium condition. And in some cases, that will mean that the glaciers will become a lot smaller. And in some cases, that means the glaciers will disappear completely. And one of the things that might be happening over the next 100 years is a disappearance of glaciers from many of the mountain ranges of the world. Now, the photos on the right, the top photo is basically showing a area rich in snowfall, glaciated area with meltwater channels coming down, flowing down from that. And then the photo below, an area in the Himalaya region where effectively that meltwater is being used for irrigation. So that reliance by a population on a freshwater resource which comes from melting glaciers. Okay, this is early work back in 2010 by Imazir et al. Basically just showing that if you think about somewhere like the Himalayas, you have a large number of huge river systems, the Indus, the Ganges, the Brahmaputra, which drain the Himalayas, drain these glaciated mountains, rely on snowfall and glaciers for the fresh water which flows down the river, and therefore the population which exists in the area downstream of them. And one of the things that Bethan has done, and this was an article which was published last year, and Bethan is an author on this, and Bethan's work in understanding glacier dynamics has gone on to modelling what will happen to that freshwater resource over the next 100 years as climate change causes glaciers to retreat. And the title is The Importance and Vulnerability of the World's Water Towers. And effectively, scientists have started to think about mountain ranges as water towers, as basically resources and storage centres for fresh water, which supply the downstream population. And over time, as glaciers retreat or glaciers disappear, the amount of water held in that water tower will also decrease or disappear. And one of the outcomes of this publication, which Bethan contributed to, was the estimation that 1.9 billion people effectively rely and are vulnerable to changes in water tower sustainability. So actually, we think about sea level change as being a major impact of glacier melting, and it is, but also the accessibility and the security of freshwater resources by large parts of the world population is another major impact of climate change on glaciers. Bethan may be your first year tutor if you come to Royal Holloway. She teaches the first year techniques course. She does a bespoke third year course on glaciers, and that involves a field trip to northern Britain, looking at actually how we reconstruct glacial change in the past.
Thank you, Ian. And the third area that we want to talk about with you today is again about the changing world, again about the changing nature of the economy. But in this case, it's also about changing senses of rights and changing lives in some particularly challenging environments. So what we're going to be doing now is focusing on the work of Professor Catherine Brickell, who is a social and development geographer who's had a very long-standing program of research looking at the economy and development requirements of the country of Cambodia. And in this particular project that I'm going to highlight today, which was called Blood Bricks, Catherine and her team traced the extraordinary story of the manufacture of bricks in Cambodia and their movement through Cambodia all the way to cities like Phnom Penh, which you can see there, and to fuel the incredible burst of urban expansion that city has experienced. So this project, as I say, was called Blood Bricks. It just recently came to an end, but the implications of this project are going to live on for many, many years to come. Because what this project uncovered was an extraordinary catalogue of injustices that stretch all the way from issues like global climate change through to issues like modern day slavery, in order to fuel the dramatic rise, the literal rise and the verticality of Phnom Penh as a high-rise and increasingly globalized city. So what Catherine does here is she looks at global forces like climate change and thinks about the way that has increasingly changed the farming practices in places like Cambodia, traditionally been, of course, very water-intensive kind of farming. But as that water becomes more scarce for the reasons, in part, that Ian has just outlaid for us in the previous section, those farmers are becoming increasingly impoverished. They're unable to respond to the dramatic speed of climate change. That often then forces those farmers to make really difficult decisions about how to sustain their lives and livelihoods. They turn increasingly to industry. Them and their farmers become very often laborers working in factories. And one of the boom factories at the moment are brick kilns, producing bricks for the building industry in Cambodia. And there in the bottom left-hand side, you can see a brick factory, a brick storage area, producing vast quantities of ceramic bricks for cities like Phnom Penh. And those children aren't just there accidentally or for an aesthetic, they're there because they are working there. The children of farmers displaced from their land because of climate change, increasingly turning to work in industry. And in order to pay down their debts, this isn't just straightforward employment. This is often indentured labor, where the farmer and their families are effectively sold into a kind of modern day slavery in order to pay off their debts. And here are some quite dramatic images from those brick kilns. On the bottom right hand side there, you can see a brick kiln, and you can see the kind of the toxic nature of the environment in these kinds of facilities. Dangerous, dark, very, very dirty. And the thing that's fueling these kilns, it's not wood, it's not coal. In many cases, it's discarded fragments of material from clothing factories, because of course Cambodia is also, of course, very, very well known for its production of textiles and of cotton. The cotton that doesn't make it into our clothes gets burnt, with all of the toxins and the colorants and the other chemicals that cotton is treated with being released back into the atmosphere. And one of the things that Catherine's team discovered were these labels that had been cut off of clothing that was being burned. And you can see some of our biggest known brands in the UK there, all part of, perhaps unknowingly, part of a kind of product chain that leads to the enslavement of young people in countries like Cambodia and in cities like Phnom Penh. The outcome of Catherine's project is, first of all, an incredible website that I really do advocate that you should go and look at, but also the production of a very, very powerful report that was launched in Parliament last year. You can see the report there on the left-hand side, Blood Bricks, Untold Stories of Modern Slavery and Climate Change from Cambodia. Catherine's work is right at the cutting edge of kind of the impact agenda in geography. Her work is changing government policy. It's changing our attitudes to terms like modern day slavery. And of course, in the UK at the moment, we're having a very open discussion about the nature of slavery. We're often doing that in relation to the past and to statues and to elements of British history and heritage. We might also remember that slavery isn't an entirely historic process. It continues, perhaps in slightly different ways, perhaps in slightly different places, and involving slightly different bodies in the 21st century. So hopefully what we tried to do over the last 15 minutes or so is to give you a showcase of not just the research that gets done, but of the impact that geographers are having on our changing world, from the changing nature of our cities, through to the changing climate, through to the changing economy, with all of those implications for the way that people are employed. So what we'd like to do on behalf of Ian and I is to say thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you for showing an interest in the Department of Geography. Geographers really are changing the world, and we need a new generation of geographers to help us get involved in that project. Geographers are really good at asking big questions about the nature of the modern world, and hopefully you can see that we're also at times pretty good at answering those questions as well.